It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Suspected Russian spies are arrested in the UK under the Official Secrets Act. Counter-terror police detained 5 people, with 3 of the suspects linked to addresses in northwest London and Norfolk.
Russia and Putin will stop at very little to pursue their state objectives, whether it's on the battlefield or in the sort of espionage elements of areas of the UK and Europe.
Do you risk encouraging violence by undermining faith in the justice system, sir?
Also tonight, racketeering, a criminal enterprise and forgery. We look at the shocking allegations against Donald Trump in the latest indictment. Private sector wages rise above inflation, but what does that mean for interest rates? And relief for the weekly shop as food inflation falls to its lowest level this year.
Also on Sky News at 10, live from Australia. Here in Sydney tomorrow, England and Australia go head-to-head in the semi-final match, and the rivalry is hotting up.
There's 2 teams that are very good, they're very strong and have grown into the tournament. So I think it's going to be very tight and it's going to be very, very competitive.
The winners will play Spain after they beat Sweden to reach their first ever World Cup final.
Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. It's been confirmed that 5 people accused of being Russian spies have been arrested in the UK. They were detained under the Official Secrets Act. Of the 5, a Bulgarian couple who once lived in northwest London and a man who runs a tech and artificial intelligence company. They're expected to appear in court in January. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt has more.
A couple who've lived in the UK for several years are among the 5 suspects arrested over spying allegations. As well as working here, they've helped fellow Bulgarians settle here. This was Katrine Ivanova speaking about guiding others on the path to British citizenship. She described herself as a medical lab assistant. Less is known about her partner, Biza Jambazov. He studied at a London university. Scotland Yard's counter-terror police are investigating the couple over breaches of the Official Secrets Act. They've not been charged. But they have been charged with possessing false passports and ID cards for several European countries, including the UK. At the couple's former home in northwest London, neighbours knew little about them.
That's the first we've heard of it.
That's the first. We'd never heard a thing before.
We haven't seen them.
And nothing, yeah.
We don't really know.
Very unobtrusive. You didn't get to know them at all.
In Great Yarmouth in Norfolk, police arrested a 3rd man, all in Rusev, again suspected of spying for Russia and charged with the false passport offence. A former MI6 officer praised the police investigation.
It's an impressive operation. It will act as a deterrent, I think, for others. But of course, Russia is effectively at war at the moment, and Russia and Putin will stop at very little to pursue their state objectives, whether it's on the battlefield or in the sort of espionage elements of areas of the UK and Europe.
5 years ago in Salisbury, bungling Russian would-be assassins spread Novichok nerve agent around the town. They tried and nearly succeeded in killing former Moscow intelligence officer Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. In 2006, Alexander Litvinenko, another former Russian intelligence officer, was fatally poisoned in London. He had defected and became a Putin critic. The charge against the Bulgarians accuses them of possessing 19 false documents from 9 European countries, passports, identity cards, residency permits and a driving licence. 2 other suspects are being investigated over the spying allegations. They're on bail until September.
Well, Martin joins us from New Scotland Yard. So why are we just hearing about this now then, Martin?
There was a court hearing today at the Old Bailey.
involving one of these suspects. Now, for reasons I can't really explain at the moment, it's not reportable, but that may have prompted the emergence of the wider picture. But it certainly appears to be a police investigation that's been going on for a long time, and seemingly as secret as it is big. I mean, these 5 suspects were arrested in February. The assumption must be that the investigation had been going on for quite a while before that. But it may have been that unreportable court hearing today at the Old Bailey that perhaps triggered the revelations that have, almost certainly have gone under the media radar for probably the best part of a year.
Martin, thank you. Donald Trump has doubled down on his denial of the latest criminal charges brought against him, this time in the state of Georgia. Overnight, the former US president was indicted for illegally trying to overturn the result of the 2020 election. Mr. Trump now says he'll release his own report on election fraud on Monday next week. Well, Donald Trump now facing 4 separate criminal cases. The most serious is a federal investigation in Washington relating to the Capitol riots. The charges there include conspiracy to defraud the United States over the 2020 US presidential election. There are more than 40 criminal charges against him in Florida over his alleged mishandling of secret documents after he left the White House. And in New York, the former president is accused of falsifying business records. That's about hush money allegedly paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels. And the latest is 13 counts in the state of Georgia, including racketeering and violating his oath of office. Our US correspondent James Matthews has this report.
Thank you for having me, and Ray, thank you very much for the excellent...
This is a multi-layered crime, as a multimedia presentation. A digital capture of an alleged attempt to steal an election. Evidence of conspiracy includes technical experts being escorted into an election office in Coffee County, Georgia, to illegally access data from voting machines. Donald Trump tweets declaring voter fraud and leaning on his Vice President Mike Pence to reject the legitimate outcome of the 2020 election. A news conference of alleged conspirators.
President Trump won by a landslide. We are going to prove it.
And a Trump phone call to an election official demanding votes he didn't have.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
They are among more than 160 criminal actions detailed in the indictment, carried through the corridors of an Atlanta court building late at night. This was the admin of prosecuting a former president. U.S. political history as routine.
Thank you.
Violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state.
The 19 accused face charges of racketeering, a prosecuting tool typically used to target mafia crime. In this alleged conspiracy, there is the boss and his consigliere, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and Trump's former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. As events in Atlanta were live streamed on the news channels, so was he on his.
Now with the 4th indictment, and I feel sorry for any of the others that are involved in this. And if it involves me, I feel sorry for me too.
Do you fear a 4th indictment? Donald Trump ignored the issue of a 4th indictment when we put it to him. He was hosting a live golf tournament last week in Bedminster. Here next week, he says he'll present an irrefutable report on election fraud in the state of Georgia.
Mr. President, thank you.
This episode and its like present questions that stretch beyond a courtroom. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News. Do you risk encouraging violence by undermining faith in the justice system, sir? Whatever his faith in the justice system, it will be tested across 4 criminal trials. Donald Trump won't relish proceedings in Georgia. In some circumstances, winning back the White House might offer him the opportunity of a presidential self-pardon.
Hey, quit pushing. Back
But they don't play that card at state level. In Georgia, in principle, if he gets convicted, he stays convicted. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
So the fourth indictment against him, mentions racketeering, a criminal enterprise and forgery. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has been taking a detailed look at the charge sheet.
This is now the fourth indictment and the second one accusing Donald Trump of trying to overturn the US presidential election. Unlike a federal indictment earlier this month, this is the state of Georgia against Donald Trump. But not just him. No less than 18 other alleged co-conspirators are listed. The most indicted among them, and the best known, is this name, the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. There are an extraordinary 41 alleged crimes listed in the documents, including making false statements, impersonating a public officer, forgery, conspiracy to commit computer theft, and perjury. The indictment says Donald Trump was at the centre of a group of defendants who unlawfully conspired to participate in a criminal enterprise. There is this startling charge that they tried to access secure voting equipment and stole data, including ballot images, voting equipment software, and personal voter information. But the meat of the charge sheet is on page 20, the charge of racketeering, split up into 161 different acts, outlined in detail. There's Donald Trump's nationally televised speech declaring victory in the 2020 presidential election, falsely, and his numerous tweets whipping up claims of election fraud and false claims of ballot stuffing by Democrats. And then there's the infamous phone call in which Donald Trump tells Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, he wants him to find an extra 11,780 votes. The indictment says this was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Donald Trump is still protesting his innocence, but prosecutors are moving quickly. And there is now the possibility of him facing 4 different criminal trials, all while he's trying to fight an election campaign.
Well, let's get more then from our US correspondent, James Matthews. When will he be back in court then, James?
Hi, Anna. Well, Donald Trump and his 18 co-defendants have until noon a week on Friday to surrender themselves. I imagine there'll be some choreographed exercise so that Donald Trump can safely attend the court in Atlanta to be read a 4th set of criminal charges. In terms of when it comes to trial, this one in Georgia, the District Attorney, Fonnie Willis, is talking about a 6-month time frame. That may be a squeeze, given how full Donald Trump's legal diary is beginning to look, but also in terms of his political commitments. Next week sees the first debate of Republican candidates in Milwaukee. Donald Trump has said he may attend that. He hasn't confirmed yet, but we are getting to the stage that very awkward interface for Donald Trump, where he tries to combine the role of presidential candidate with criminal defendant. I think time in the coming months will be the proper test of how one impinges on the other.
James, there in Washington, thank you. Wages here in the UK grew at a record pace between April to June, but it's prompted fears of another interest rate rise. The annual growth in pay was 7.8%, with private sector wages rising by 8.2%. Sky's business correspondent Gurpreet Nawan has more.
Work is starting to pay. Wage growth could soon start outpacing inflation. It means we are no longer getting poorer. This restaurant owner has raised his workers' wages by 15 to 20% because of crippling staff shortages.
Everybody wants to take home more money, and they need to because their rents have increased, their cost of living has increased. So I think they're grateful. I don't think it's made a huge difference to because that increase is being absorbed somewhere else.
Official figures give us some cause for celebration. Over the past year, wages, the red line here, have failed to keep up with rising prices, the blue line. But the trend is now reversing. Wage growth, when adjusted for inflation, is now flat. A rare bit of good news for our living standards. But as ever, it's a double-edged sword, because robust pay rises are causing concern over at the Bank of England, which fears that wage growth could spur inflation. It means interest rates are probably now going to have to climb even higher. Bad news for anyone who's paying off a mortgage. And the pressure on wages isn't being helped by a missing 8 million people who are out of work and not looking for employment either. Getting some of them back could plug those staff shortages and dampen wage demands.
I did enjoy it when I did it.
But for people like Liz Evans, who suffers with pancreatitis, full-time work feels like a distant possibility. She's not alone. Economic inactivity due to long-term illness has now reached a record high.
There's a lot of reasons why I'm finding it difficult to actually be able to be full-time, because I need to have so many adjustments made to actually allow me to go into a workforce. I think it's very difficult for anybody with a long-term disability, regardless of what it is, to actually be understood fully and accepted fully in the workforce.
So the world of work is throwing up inflationary challenges. The bank is eager to stamp them out, but that doesn't come without costs. Unemployment is now rising. The fear is the bank will take interest rate hikes too far. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
The rate at which food prices are rising is easing, for some staples at least. New data shows the cost of a food shop is still much higher than this time last year, but the pace of price rises is slowing. Sky's Emma Birchley has the details.
When it comes to how much we pay for what we eat, things are moving in the right direction, with food inflation falling for the 5th consecutive month. But with some products, the prices keep on soaring. And you can see how food inflation rose to a peak in March and then began to dip. The high price of animal feed, fertiliser and fuel, as well as energy and labour costs, partly to blame for the increase. But the latest figures show a fall to 12.7%, the second sharpest monthly decrease since Cantor started monitoring grocery inflation 15 years ago. So prices are still going up, just not as rapidly as they were. A more detailed look shows that some staple items are actually falling in price. Shoppers are now paying £1.50 for 4 pints of milk, for example. That's 19p less than last month. And sunflower oil is down 22p to £2.19. It'll be a relief for cash-strapped shoppers, but the average household is still spending £5.13 more per week on groceries than they were this time last year. A part of the problem is branded goods. Research from the consumer group Which has found that some prices are soaring. A 6-pack of Mr Kipling chocolate slices at Tesco, for example, increased a whopping 129% in the last year, up from £1.16 to £2.66. Meanwhile, Pilgrim's Choice cheddar rose by 76%, and a kilo pot of Lancashire Farm natural yoghurt jumped 80%. So, overall, inflation is slowing, but the reality is food prices are likely to remain high for the rest of the year. In fact, according to the Bank of England's chief economist, they may never get back to where they were before the pandemic.
Ukraine has accused Russia of an act of piracy after Moscow released a video of its navy storming a cargo ship on the Black Sea on Sunday. The video shows the vessel's crew kneeling on deck with their hands on their heads. Then body cam footage shows armed Russian servicemen checking the ship before entering the bridge.
Stop machine! Stop it, Giant! Stop it, Giant! Keep calm and listen to me! Okay. Sit down, please sit down! Please sit down. Keep calm and listen to me. What is the captain? Speak English.
Well, Moscow said the Navy fired warning shots at the vessel after it failed to respond to a request to stop. Ukraine called the boarding of the ship a deliberate attack and called for the international community to recognise Russia's actions as a crime. Back here, 2 police forces in England have admitted data breaches affecting more than 1,000 people, including crime victims and witnesses. Norfolk and Suffolk constabularies said a technical issue led to raw data being included in files in response to freedom of information requests.
Part of our inquiries will be to establish exactly what has happened to the information and ensure that there are measures in place to minimise the chance of it creating any more concern for individuals.
Detectives investigating a homophobic attack on 2 men outside a venue in southwest London have released an image of a man they want to speak to. The image was taken outside a bar, the Two Brewers in Clapham, at the time of the attack, around 10:15 on Sunday evening. Anyone with information has been asked to contact the Met Police on 101 or via Twitter. Online child grooming crimes have hit a record high, with figures showing that more than 6,000 offences were recorded last year. The child protection charity, the NSPCC, says the numbers show why the online safety bill needs to pass into law, despite concerns from tech companies about privacy and security. Our technology correspondent, Arti Natchiappan, has the story.
For today's children, social media is unavoidable. But as its popularity grows, so do the risks of being online. When she was 15 years old, Eva was tricked into sending explicit photos to someone she met on social media and believed to be a boy her age. He later revealed himself to be an adult man and threatened to share the photos with her family and friends.
I knew I was in trouble, I just didn't know how to get myself out of it, because the last thing you want to do is tell your mum what you've just done. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I had school the next day, and I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, like, what have I done? Up until that man got sentenced, I'd had those thoughts of how did I let that happen? And now that's when my perspectives kind of shift to kind of go, actually, he was the one that took advantage of me, and it actually wasn't my fault.
New figures gathered by the NSPCC Children's Charity show that in the last 6 years, children under the age of 12 made up a quarter of the total number of known victims. Girls were targeted in 83% of cases where the gender was known, and nearly half of the offences took place on Facebook, Instagram or WhatsApp. The government wants social media companies to be more responsible for the content published on their platforms. Tech firms are arguing that giving regulators access to scan messages would compromise users' privacy because it would break end-to-end encryption. However, internet safety campaigners are concerned that the technology would be a smokescreen for abusers.
Before you put it into the encrypted channel, it is entirely possible from a technical point of view to scan that content to see if it contains either an illegal image of a child being sexually abused or if it's a sexualized communication with a child. That does not touch or affect encryption at all.
Next month is expected to mark the end of years of legislative wrangling as MPs take a final vote on whether to turn the proposals into law. But passing the bill is only the first step. The biggest challenge for regulators is how to put it into practice. Arti Natchiappan, Sky News.
Here in Australia, we're counting down to the semi-final of the Women's World Cup. It reignites one of the oldest sporting rivalries. And the question is this as far as the Lionesses go, given all the injuries that they've had in the build-up and a red card, or can they go all the way? But Australia seems supremely confident the Matildas are going to do it. Rob Harris, our sports correspondent, has this report.
From the Sydney statues to the streets, connections with Australia, a legacy of colonialism. Links that run deeply through the sporting rivalry with England. It's here where England beat the host to win the Rugby World Cup in 2003. And where their footballers will meet competitively for the first time, chasing a place in the Women's World Cup final. Anticipation is at fever pitch among fans.
Oh, England can go jump, basically, can't they? This is our home turf. This is the land of the Matildas. They deserve to win. They've been playing amazingly.
But the sporting enmity doesn't weigh that heavily on the Lionesses and their Dutch manager.
I don't think they're the underdog. They play at home. The stadium will be really full. So I think there's two teams that are very good, they're very strong and have grown into the tournament. So I think it's going to be very tight and it's going to be very, very competitive.
Australia goalkeeper Mackenzie Arnold knows that from playing in England at West Ham.
Obviously, there's a massive rivalry between Australia and England. I mean, with sports all over the place, and that's obviously not going to be no different tomorrow.
With the weight of the nation on their shoulders, the Matildas could benefit from the added spice to overcome the European champions. The Lionesses are well used to playing with a packed Wembley on their side, but this could feel like a new intimidating experience for them at Stadium Australia. More than 70,000 raucous Australians are expected to be roaring on their side in their first World Cup semi-final. These are the blockbuster occasions England relish.
I think we're just super excited to play in front of a really intense full stadium for the women's game. That's what we want, that's what we expect now at these big tournaments, especially in a semi-final. So for us, we thrive in those moments.
England are the highest ranked side still in contention after Sweden was stunned by Spain. It was a dramatic final 10 minutes in Auckland with the lead gained, cancelled out and regained. Spain claiming a 2-1 win and reaching a Women's World Cup final for the first time. History beckons for Spain, and Wednesday's other semi-final showdown will determine if it will be England or Australia facing them here in the World Cup final. Rob Harris, Sky News, Sydney.
Well, have the Matildas got good reason to be so confident, or are they underestimating England a little bit? Rob Harris joins me now. Are they?
Well, England have the credentials, don't they? As European champions, the highest ranked side left in this competition, and a pretty strong defence too, with Bright, Carter and Greenwood. They've only been behind once at this World Cup and just for a few minutes against Colombia. But we've sensed here, haven't we? Australia really do have the nation behind them in a way they've never experienced before in football.
Sam Kerr is the Australian star player. She is the best striker in the world. She plays at Chelsea, so the England girls know her. She has been injured. She was pictured going into the hotel with her leg strapped. Is this mind games, or will she play and cause a lot of problems?
And we could see some ice on her knee yesterday, and she's not played a full game. She's not started a match for Australia, and she is the player that they are pinning the hopes of the nation on. But that injury has caused so much concern. But if she does play, these England players know her so well from her time at Chelsea. She's there, and she's in the WSL week in, week out, but she does pose that really strong attacking threat. But the Australians have been trying to get the edge in this grudge match. One of the newspapers here put a helicopter over England training, trying to see if they could get any Serena Wiegmann's tactics.
Well, that shows that they're worried, doesn't it? They are going to walk in, the Lionesses, into this cauldron at the Olympic Stadium of green and gold, over 80,000 people not cheering for them. How much is that going to help the Aussies?
Oh, they're really going to be inspired by it. You get a real sense of just how the nation is rallying behind the Matildas. This is not a football nation, it's a rugby and Aussie rules football country. So it's not just women's football getting an unprecedented platform, it's football generally. And they're coming together as a nation to rally behind the Matildas. It's that passion that England have to take on tonight in Stadium Australia.
Yeah, and they are a bunch of winners. That's what Serena has said. You know, they like to win and they have resilience. Now is the time for England to find another gear. They've talked about it. They haven't really shown it yet. Now is the time to find it. And as for Australia, well, they have been enjoying this so much. All of the news anchors have been wearing green and gold, all of them to a man. They've been wearing their scarves on air. The nation has really got behind this team. And it's really captured the imagination of Australia. And they're already talking about a final, but can England do something about that and spoil the party? I only found one person who was nervous. It was one lady in the accreditation centre, and she said, I am very worried. I've watched England's matches. They are very well drilled, and they have been that, extremely organised.
Good to hear. Jackie, thank you very much indeed. Plenty of courage from you. Very early in the morning, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleinman, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories, of course, we'll be discussing this on the front of the Eye. Their headline, Russian spies arrested in UK suburbia. That and plenty more after this. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. 5 people accused of spying in the UK on behalf of Russia have been arrested. The former US President Donald Trump has criticised his latest indictment, describing it as deranged, partisan and corrupt. And there are concerns interest rates will continue to rise after data revealed wages grew at a record annual pace between April and June this year. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines then, with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Dean. Fabulous to see both of you. And welcome, Alex, your first go back in the studio.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
Several years, we think, don't we? Anyway, let's take a look at the front pages, shall we? The arrest of 5 suspected Russian spies. Top story for the Metro, with their headline, Putin spies seized in the UK. The Eye picturing 3 of the suspects and describes them as Russian spies arrested in UK suburbia. A similar theme in the Mail, which calls them spies who came in from suburbia. This is the front of the Mirror, the spies next door, the headline there. The Guardian explains that those arrested are Bulgarians suspected of spying for the Russian security services. The Times says they'd been posing as journalists before their arrest. Well, the Telegraph labels them the Northolt spy ring because 3 of them were arrested close to the RAF base, frequently used by the royal family, amongst others. Daily Express says, meanwhile, there's another big rise in the state pension coming next year, thanks to a large increase in wages and the triple lock, which decides how big the rise should be. The Financial Times reports on moves to buy into and break up one of the big 4 financial consulting firms, EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young. While The Sun looks ahead to the Women's World Cup semi-final tomorrow, urging the England Lionesses to waltz past the Matildas. And finally, The Star reports that the graves of the fabled Knights Templar have seemingly been found after 800 years in a church in Staffordshire, a discovery it says is worthy of the Da Vinci Code. Anyway, don't forget, scan the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages for yourself of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. And head straight to them, Jenny and Alex here. So, Alex, talk us through what we know so far and what the papers have been able to find out about this case, which has been slow to emerge, hasn't it, really?
It's been slow for us to find out about, but we must expect our security services to have been on this for quite some time. 5 people so far, no sense of whether there are other cells involved that are going to be drawn into it. 3 charged and 2 further being questioned. A couple of interesting things about it for me. The use of Bulgaria as a cover country by the Russians is a very old story. You may recall that in From Russia with Love, James Bond runs into a Bulgar connection, and that's part of the story here. A further one is a kind of double bluff being suggested, where one of the people concerned declared on his LinkedIn profile that he was a signal intelligence expert. Well, yes, now I think we know what sort of signals and intelligence you might have been providing.
Allegedly, of course.
Allegedly, of course. But moreover, it sits within a picture in which the current head of MI5 has said that more than 100 Russian spies have been deterred from entering the United Kingdom since 2018. It sits in an environment where David Smith, of course, was arrested and sentenced to 13 years in prison for his spying in our embassy in Germany. And it just seems that some of these people have been here for quite some time. We have been penetrated by a foreign intelligence that does not wish us well.
And, you know, the picture it paints also is of a Russian president who will not stop at whatever he needs to do to reach his means, amidst the context of war, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. Although, by all accounts, these people have been living in this country for quite a long time, so it's not a sleeper cell that was created in response to the Ukraine war. I mean, these people have been here for quite a long time. And it's quite interesting because we now feel like we're in this different digital age and that spying still happens through hacking or spy balloons or this kind of thing. This shows that old-fashioned sleeper cells who can be people that are trusted by a foreign agent within a country it's still a method of espionage, and we haven't had arrests of Russian spies in this country for a very long time. But if you think about it, There are many unexplained things. You know, at this stage, we don't know what these specific people were involved in. But, for example, things like the Novichok poisoning, there are many things that we don't know. How was the Novichok brought into the country? So it is useful for foreign agents to have people planted in this country who can be called upon when necessary. And what's really interesting in the reporting, because obviously the story broke earlier on today, these people were arrested on the 8th of February, and it's only been announced today. And reporters have been out getting information about them, and they very much were embedded in their communities. They were the spies next door. They made cakes and pies for their neighbours. They lived in Harrow and Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. The two of them, who were a couple, apparently used to give classes on British culture, life in the UK, to other Bulgarians. So they were very good at kind of integrating themselves. So this is not something that's just in response to the Ukraine war. This is a long-term, seeded strategy to have useful people, if these people do turn out to be spies, useful people embedded in the British community.
It's worth just briefly picking, and this front of the Daily Mail, I stress this person is not me, who's on the left, contrary to the views expressed by many wags online before appearing today. It's worth mentioning that, of course, whilst these people were foreign nationals, a number of the people who've been interviewed, interrogated, accused and indeed convicted by British authorities have been British nationals who've held sympathy with intelligence or activities from abroad, including Smith, who was arrested and convicted because he had sympathy for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But Melita Norwood was, of course, the granny spy in suburbia. You can have an agent or a source for some decades, and part of the point about sleeper cells isn't necessarily that they spy directly, it's that they provide succour and support when those who are spying directly are in trouble or need them. And so that we don't know yet whether these people were directly involved in a great deal of espionage themselves. They may have been, the allegation may be, that they were going to be called up to support those who were involved in the front line.
And the specific allegations, if we look through The Guardian, I mean, nearly all the newspapers are leading on this.
Yes.
In a sense, it's a news story for newspapers to get their teeth into in August as well, isn't it? Is about identity fraud, I suppose, isn't it? That's the point for the specifics of it.
There are some quite remarkable details that have come out. What we do know from their arrest is that they were caught with an enormous number of documents on them. They had, apparently, passports, identity cards, papers for the UK, Bulgaria, Italy, Spain, France, Croatia, Slovenia, Greece and the Czech Republic. The Times is reporting that they had fake press cards and clothing, allowing them, if they had wanted to pose as journalists from Discovery or National Geographic. That would suggest people either who are holding these documents and materials to help other people pose or people who could do it themselves. But this is sophisticated stuff. This is not, one or two phony documents. This is a systematic, state-sponsored thing. To have so many documents, not just from states, but also from broadcasters.
Drawing out that detail about posing as that which they were not, as journalists, it's also reported that they didn't just do that in the United Kingdom. The same people are accused of doing that abroad, from the UK, using us as a base to spy on friendly countries like Germany. So if these allegations are true, it'll be rather like, you may recall, Angela Merkel said friends don't spy on friends when it turned out the Americans had hacked her phone. It may be unknowingly we were hosting those, not just spying on us, but spying on our allies as well.
And the Telegraph makes something of the proximity to an RAF base as well. The Northolt spy ring they talk about here as part of these allegations.
Yes, I mean, we don't know the details in all of this. Proximity means a kind of physical proximity there. I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting that is kind of brought out in this Telegraph reporting is if people have been in this country for a decade, how are they uncovered? Is it through intelligence? Is it through some whisperings coming back from Russia? Or have they slipped up somehow? And it's got some interesting detail here. The Telegraph have clearly, dispatched their reporters, there are 3 reporters on this story, to go and talk to neighbours. And one of the neighbours of the man in Northolt said that the Bulgarian claimed to have worked for Interpol and tried to erect a huge satellite dish on the side of the property. Subtle. So either that's a very clever double bluff, or perhaps, they got a bit arrogant, they got a bit lax. who knows? But, you know, it's quite interesting what some of the neighbours are saying. A lot of them saying that they had no reason to doubt them, that they paid their rent on time. She was very good looking, apparently. It's one of these things where it's like, right, let's scramble our reporters and see what we can find. We don't know very much at all. It is all the stuff of spy novels, really. But what's interesting is that this is still going on at a time when we expect that everything is done virtually. Human beings with eyes and houses and safe houses are still you know, important.
Human intelligence still vital, and there will be a film made one day, I have no doubt, and it'll be interesting. But the part of the film that we don't know yet is to your point about the uncovering. And normally it's either a stroke of good luck, or despite the hard work of our intelligence services, it's a stroke of good luck in catching somebody, or it's because somebody has grasped. It's because somebody internally has said within the Russian system, Britain, you're being spied upon, and you might start looking at these people. And if that's the case, I hope the person who put their hand up is safe and secure tonight. Because one thing we do know is that Putin does not tolerate any kind of dissent.
As we know from Novichok and Polonium-210, remember those cases all too well. I think the Times is also leading on it. Have we got that one too? You've probably seen it. There we go. Russian spies accused of posing as journalists. The point you were making earlier. Once again, picturing those three who have been charged. Trio used forged press cards to carry out surveillance. The police claim, again, it's allegations, as we have to stress. But of course, journalists get access into areas that other people do not, is part of the point you were making.
Yes, and as somebody who's a journalist who relies on this kind of accreditation, that's very worrying that people could think that you're a spy. Quite often you go to certain countries and people assume if you're a journalist you are a spy. This kind of thing won't help. But this reporting suggesting, from what the Times has heard from the police, that these are not people who are holding documents for other people. These are people who are using the documents themselves to get intelligence.
Yeah, that's right. And I suppose one other thing to add about their circumstances is that traditionally within espionage, one sleeper cell or one cell doesn't know about the activities of another. So you're not likely to get that much useful intelligence from these people about ones we haven't discovered yet, which will always leave us guessing the known unknown. Who else is there in Britain? If we've caught these people, is it the case that we've found 100% of the spies? That would seem unlikely, wouldn't it? And therefore you don't know how many others there are alongside them.
That's the thing. In the front of the Mirror says the spies next door, and that's the thing is, look at your neighbours closely tonight, as the Mirror is saying. You never know.
I'm sure they were mostly fine. Anyway, lots more stuff to come in the next part of our programme, including the very latest on the new allegations against Donald Trump. That and more after this.
So much nicer.
I grew up in a family where there was lots of poverty. So both my parents were heroin addicts. And as you can imagine, that resulted in us being hungry most days. So I went to school without food in my belly, without a hug. And yeah, it was a really difficult childhood. And it made it really hard for me to do well in education. Children expected to sit still every day. For hours every day. And when you've been through what I've been through, it was very hard to concentrate. So I didn't perform as well as what I could. I was poor at a time where there was lots of investment in poverty and there was lots of investment in people like me. And so when I, as a young woman who was living in a council house, who was on benefits, I really wanted to better my life, but I just didn't have any opportunity. I didn't know anybody who went to university, but I was lucky that when I wanted to change my life, there were all these systems and services in place to empower me. So I was lucky that I was able to go to a foundation year and I suppose take that first step into education. And that was a massive change for me. I actually learned, my schooling had taught me that I wasn't very clever because I failed. I didn't get my GCSEs. I didn't perform well. I actually thought that meant that I wasn't very bright. And then when I had an opportunity to go to university when I was 23 and the system was in place to support me, I learned this amazing lesson that I'm actually really, really intelligent. I had an inconsistent experience in school. So actually 2 of my teachers saved my life. If it wasn't for them 2 teachers, one of them actually used to change me every day and give me fresh underwear. Another one actually taught me about the wonders of Shakespeare and really went out of his way to ensure that I participated. But I had this inconsistent experience with my teachers and with education. So some people really didn't understand poverty and what that looks like in the classroom. So they had expectations of me that I just wasn't capable of reaching. And my belief is, I'm not angry now because anger doesn't serve me and doesn't help me in trying to make things fairer. But I do think that we need to improve how we see poverty and maybe design education in a way that reaches those on the margins. The ones who are already doing well, they're going to do well anyway. But I mean, there's girls like me in every classroom across England right now who have the potential to thrive like I am and contribute to the world, and we're not actually serving them in the proper way.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Dean. Welcome back to both of you. Let's turn to Trump, shall we? We've moved through allegations concerning Putin, effectively. Now on to Trump. It's like the old mood music, isn't it? Here we are. Trump charged using mafia laws over the election in 2020, once again. And Jenny, this time in the state of Georgia, which has implications, really, for the case.
It does, because these are not federal charges, they're state charges. So if he were to become president, he can't pardon himself. These are racketeering charges that are normally reserved for mobsters, which have a minimum jail term of 5 years. And it could potentially be televised, this trial, which the other 3 charges, because this is now the 4th criminal charge. He's got 91 felony charges against him. 4 trials happening next year. 2024 is going to be a busy year for him if he's the Republican candidate, because as well as trying to become president, he's also going to be fending off all of these charges in court. But this one is significant, even though you might be struggling to keep up with all the different charges against him. This one is significant because he may have to appear in court on TV, and he has 10 days to answer. But, you know, he's facing a minimum of 5 years in jail if he's found guilty.
Of course, no matter who the defendant is, no court will convict you in absentia because you're busy defending yourself in another court. So realistically, he can't get through, he can't be the subject of all these trials before you get to the next election. One thing everyone agrees on is that if you're going to do this properly, it's going to take time to go through evidentiary processes and taking testimony and so forth. The idea of doing these 4 back-to-back and trying to get it done before November, it seems pretty much impossible to me.
But even one would be clashy with things like Super Tuesday, wouldn't they? Do you know what I mean? Are you suggesting that they won't get any of them done before the election?
I mean, you could certainly see at least one being resolved, but the challenge for the Trump campaign seems to be blithely dismissed, which is, well, so what then? We'll just carry on. Jenny is right. The Georgia case is different in kind because it's one that he wouldn't have the prospect of directly being able to pardon himself. There is a pardoning procedure, but it's by a panel that would be in Georgia and can't exercise its powers until you've served a portion of your sentence. So it's the least attractive one for him to get convicted on. People will naturally look at this and think the federal charges are the most serious and significant. Actually, it could be the Georgia one that's most challenging for the Trump campaign. But it is worth thinking about the fact that, traditionally at least, state-level charges would give way to federal charges in the kind of precedence of batting order. So if you faced a traditionally more serious federal charge, that might get heard first. I think Trump's critics would rather like the Georgian one to be taking prominence, given the severity of the potential outcome for him.
Yes, and a 98-page indictment, very detailed, complex. One described the federal or the Washington indictment we had only recently as sort of a bit like Hemingway, you know, pithy and short.
Yes.
And this one is a bit like War and Peace.
More narrative. It's more narrative.
More narrative.
There's so much to go into.
Yeah, the FT on the front page as well. Lots of people talking about this woman we see here, that she's a Democrat, that it's politicised, etc., etc.
Which is, of course, what Donald Trump has said. He's always said that this is a witch hunt. Each of these charges is always a witch hunt, which is strange because every time he's indicted, his poll ratings go up. So if it's a witch hunt, it is not one that works very well. It doesn't, you know, it emboldens his base. And again, I I think, you know, as somebody who loves the United States and who cares a lot about geopolitics, it's so depressing for me that there seems to be no way for the Republicans to find someone better that their base is going to go for than somebody who's facing so many charges and bringing the country into so much disrepute.
I mean, look, I do point out, just gently, that the candidate for president, past-serving president, is entitled as much to the presumption of innocence as the supposed Russian spooks we just spent the first half of the programme discussing. But
yes, he is.
What I will concede is that he, just taking his behaviour on air, which I'm entitled to judge entirely, I thought he behaved disgracefully after the result of the last election. And I therefore think, whether he's convicted of any of these things or not, we are as entitled as anyone else to say, as great friends of America, like you, I love the country, is this contest the best that the Americans can do? For perhaps the most important job in perhaps the most important country in the world, is it really right that Joe Biden, who cannot now finish a sentence, is going to face Donald Trump, who may get many sentences? Is that really what we're going to... thank you. Is that really what we're going to have on offer?
And they're both going to be because he's going to be fighting all of this, and they're both old, and, you know, God help planet Earth if this is what the leaders of the free world are fighting over and about.
Yeah. OK, should we get a bit of football, which I know is your favourite subject, both of you. But anyway, all eyes, obviously,
I'm keen on the football.
OK, right, OK, well, I'm not sure. Jenny...
Well, I'm like, yay, English women, go for it. I know they're in the semi-finals tomorrow, big rivalry between Australia and England. There you go. That's the limit of my knowledge. Stop.
Well, let me say something different to that, which is that having spent quite some time in Australia, the ferocity of the Australian support base is not to be underestimated. And one of the things that is rightly pointed out by those who so strongly want to support the growth of the English game, in the English women's game, is that they just don't draw the same kinds of crowds in week-to-week competitions in the UK competitions, in English competition, as the men's game. So our women have not been exposed to quite the same... Of course, they did fantastically in the Euros, but they haven't walked into a stadium of 80,000 people baying for their blood in the way that they are about to. And talk about an 11th, 12th, 13th person on the pitch for the Australians. That's quite a significant contribution.
Yeah, won't make any difference at all, will it?
I hope not. I hope not.
Anyway, it's a morning game, so we can watch, which is good. Often there at this time of night, and you sit there trying to watch it on a small telly. But anyway, we will look forward to watching that, and look forward to seeing you shortly as well, both of you. Jenny, Alex, thank you very much indeed for now. Thank you. Let's take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, there will be more rain on Friday, but the next few days look mainly dry and warm. Wednesday will start mainly fine, if a little chilly in some rural spots. Scotland will have the odd shower, mist and fog around too, mainly in the south and the west. That fog will soon lift to leave plenty of morning sunshine. Northern Scotland seeing more in the way of cloud. Most places, though, dry, a few light showers around, with almost anywhere at risk. Calm conditions mean it will feel quite warm in the sunshine. The afternoon will bring more of the same, showers becoming mainly confined to the north and west, and on Thursday showers will be even more isolated, leaving it largely dry with some good sunny spells. Warm again, the wind will pick up in some coastal regions where it'll feel cooler. Friday looks warm and humid, but heavy and thundery rain is on the way.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.